So I've currently got on my table a Civil War title. It is Dead of Winter. It's the Battle of Stones River, part of the Great Battles of the American Civil War series. This is one that I've been meaning to get to for a while, and hadn't really had the opportunity, kept getting distracted by other games. And in fact, as you can see, there's only one map here. This is actually a 4-map, fairly monster-sized game, but I'm only doing a 1-map scenario for it, largely because it was something that I just wanted to, it was sort of taking up time until Blood and Roses got here, which is the new Richard Berg Men of Iron series game on Battles of the Wars of the Roses. I've been on a bit of a Wars of the Roses kick lately, having recently played the Battle of Bosworth Field in a White Dog Games game called Loyauté Mêlée. And so I've been anxiously waiting Blood and Roses, and that finally arrived. But in the interim here, while I was getting it punched and clipped, and while I was waiting for it to arrive and then getting it punched and clipped, I thought I'd do a single scenario here from the Battle of Stones River, because mainly I visited Stones River Battlefield back in January. On January 6th, I was there and took a nice tour of the battlefield. And historically, January 6th is not too far off from when the battle was fought historically. It was fought over the 3-day period from, actually 4-day period, from December, or no, it was December 31st, so it's a 3-day period. December 31st to January 2nd, 1862 into 1863. And so I was there about a week after the battle was historically fought, so the battlefield looked seasonally much the way it would have at the time the battle was fought. Definitely during the winter, hence the title Dead of Winter. So I wanted to play a scenario from that battle, which I didn't really know much about before I visited the battlefield. I had never really read much about the Battle of Stones River. My Western theater knowledge is lacking compared to my Eastern theater knowledge. I think that's something that a lot of people who study the Civil War can claim. Although I don't have much of an excuse for that, as I actually have ancestors who fought in the Western theater of the Civil War. Indeed, that's the only ancestors that I've traced so far only fought in the Western theater. So unless I can dig up some more ancestors that fought in the Eastern theater, I'm only represented by Midwesterners who fought for the Union in the Civil War, particularly the 63rd Ohio Regiment. So I visited the battlefield while I was there, picked up a book on the battle, Battle of Stones River by Larry J. Daniel, just to learn as much as I could before I started playing the game. And since I knew I had another game coming that I wanted to play, I didn't want to play the giant 4-map monster scenario, because that would just take forever. So I picked a single map battle that just uses one of the maps, and I picked a part of the battle that I probably wouldn't have even gotten to if I actually played the 4-map version. What is being simulated here is Breckinridge's Confederate division assault on the Union left. On July 2nd, or January 2nd, the Union troops on the left of Rosecrans's army, and zoom in on them here, that's these guys over here, crossed the Stones River, which you can see there between the artillery units there and the Union line. That's the Stones River along there. They crossed to the other side of the Stones River and began threatening the Confederate right flank. So Bragg saw this and determined to have one of his only remaining fairly unharmed divisions from the previous couple days battle, Breckinridge's division decided to have them assault these Union positions here on this side of the river. Now, the Union position on that side of the river is fairly weak. Those are not full-strength regiments there. There's only about, looks like 3 brigades worth, plus another depleted brigade back here, the guys with the light green banners there, on that side of the river to defend against an assault. And Breckinridge here, as you can see, he's got these troops with the green stripe on them there. That's the Kentucky, his orphan brigade. Breckinridge is from Kentucky, and these were all Kentucky regiments in this brigade. They are full strength and will be leading the charge along the river line. And then over here he's got 2 other brigades. He's got 3. He's got Hanson's brigade. I forget whose brigade this is, or maybe this is Hanson. Preston. And then I think Hanson is in charge of the Kentucky brigade. And then Adams. So Preston, Adams, sorry, I'm trying to run this on my tripod here and I ended up pointing at nothing. There we've got Preston's brigade there, the yellow numbers on them, and then Pillow's brigade back there with the red. All these guys right now, as you can see here, are in march orders, because I need to move them quickly, although not so quickly that they get fatigued. I don't want them going into the charge totally fatigued, but I do only have 4 turns in order to complete this scenario, so they need to move quickly to get up to the Union line here. As you can see, the Orphan Brigade I've taken out of march orders, and they're just in advance orders because they are close enough to the enemy now where I don't want to have to be trying to switch orders on them later. So they're preparing to assault this Union position. Historically what happened is these Union positions pretty much just disintegrated and broke and ran back across the river. And Breckinridge's division ended up chasing them right down here to the riverbank, and as you can see here, it's kind of hidden by hidden by Crittenden's counter there. There's a ford there across the river, and that's the only place that the Confederates will be able to cross. And what will be waiting for them? Well, you can see Palmer's division there. There's a lot of cannon. Palmer himself there is on top of one of them. And there's these cannon here that I have yet to get in position, but this is high ground here along the river where all of these Union troops are stacked. And there's going to be a giant line of cannon that would represent Mendenhall's grand battery of almost 58 guns that he had lined up on the hill here. So when Breckinridge's men came flying out of these woods here and down to the riverbank, they were just absolutely annihilated by this massive cannonade on the hill on the other side of the river here. And so this was something that Breckinridge had recognized before he even made the charge, and he was very much against even doing the assault because he was afraid of the very result that ended up happening. Initially it looked good for the Confederates because they had done what they were supposed to do in annihilating these Union brigades here. But there was just no way that they could force a crossing of the river, which is what Bragg wanted to do to try and crumple the Union left. So, these Union troops were fairly easy to handle being out of position and separated by the river from the main body of the Union Army. But, so it was not surprising that they would run back across the river. The Confederates, however, saw that as unfettered victory and went running after them and right into the face of all those guns there. So it ended up being a total disaster for the Confederates. Breckinridge's entire division was essentially destroyed. What else you can see here are there's other Confederate troops lined up on the same side of the river as the Union here. And this was kind of surprising to me, given the historical positioning of the troops here. There was no assault along this side of the river. Everything historically came from Breckinridge's division over here. Some of Breckinridge's guys swam across the river at a ford right in this area and tried to snipe at the Union artillery positions from the woods here, and those guys were eventually cleared out. What this game has set up with are like 4 or 5 brigades down here that can assist in the assault. And I mean, this Union line up here is not particularly strong. There's a lot of artillery there, but you can see there's a terrain, sort of a rise there, a couple of hexes there where the terrain's a different color, that will shield those advancing Confederate troops from the Union Grand Battery fire. So they're going to be able to get right up there on that line and maybe force a breakthrough. None of that happened historically. There was no movement over here. All these guys just sat back here in breastworks and didn't advance at all. So I thought, well, maybe they're on there because, I mean, just off of the map of the playing space here, off of this direction of the map, are the rest of the Union and Confederate armies. So I'm thinking maybe that based on what we don't actually see that's off map here, there would not have been an advance, just because these troops knew that if they hit this, what's represented here on the map, there would actually be a lot more defending that's not shown on the map. So my initial thought was, well, you set those up, and then there's some kind of scenario rules that say, oh, you can't use them or you can't bring them in unless you're willing to sacrifice X victory points, which is a fairly common sort of thing to try and to limit battles to potential historical outcomes, but not end up limiting it so much that the player doesn't have options to make some new history happen, to see how things might have turned out a little differently. But there are no rules for these guys in the battle book, so you're free to do with them whatever you want. So naturally, I'm going to move them up and try and get a coordinated assault here that presses both sides of the Union position, not just these guys across the river. And so I think under that with that potential, if I've got the cannon line up here engaged by Confederate troops on this side of the river, if Breckinridge's men can break the Union troops over here, they won't have these guns waiting for them crossing the river. So the question is whether I'll be able to do that in the 3 remaining turns of the game, of the scenario, or not. Basically, if you leave any battle-effective Union divisions in the game, and the Confederates have none, it's definitely a Confederate loss. I might be able to force a draw if I can keep some of Breckinridge's men battle-effective. If not, then it's going to be a loss for them. So the biggest challenge will be, I think, hitting Negley's men up here. There's a lot of men there in Negley's division. And so it's going to be tough to render those guys combat ineffective with whatever I have left to cross the river with of Breckinridge's men. But these guys can try and threaten the battery line up there. And there's a couple of supporting infantry units there from I think that's more guys from Palmer's division. Looks like Hazen and Chuft. They'll be there to try and defend the cannon from these couple of Confederate brigades. But if they can't, then Negley may have to move men over there, and that might be an opportunity to try and render Negley's units battle ineffective. So we'll have to see. But, I mean, the fact that these guys are advancing at all is not very historically accurate. So I'm not sure why there weren't rules there about what you could actually do with those guys. But anyway, that's where the battle is now. I've completed the first turn, starting the second turn, trying to get Breckinridge's men in position. They need to really hoof it now. I may have to risk some fatigue on them just to get them through the woods here and into contact with these Union troops, because they're going to run out of time otherwise. So we'll see how it goes for the remaining few turns, and I will be back with a wrap-up. I've finished up running the Doomed Assault scenario in Dead of Winter. As you can see here, I had my handy-dandy Stones River National Battlefield mug there to do the chit draw from. This scenario, it's the title Doomed Assault would seem to indicate that the odds of the Confederates winning are not very good. I did not find that to be the case. Actually, the victory scenario, or the victory conditions for the scenario, are if there are no combat effective divisions east of Stones River, which is this side here where Breckinridge's troops assaulted. You can see the river there on the left. On this side of the river, if there's no effective Union divisions on that side of the river, and Breckinridge's division, the guys with the green stripes, is combat effective, the Confederates win. If there are no, actually, the victory conditions, I had to read them pretty carefully because it seemed like there's kind of a loophole in them. So if there's no combat effective Union divisions east of Stones River, but Breckinridge's division is also combat ineffective, then it's a draw. And if at least one Union division is still combat effective and Breckinridge's division is combat ineffective, then the Union player wins. So it sounds like the Union player can't win unless he renders Breckinridge's division combat ineffective. So if the Confederate player sees things going poorly, he can simply have Breckinridge's division pull back into the woods, too far away for the Union troops to be able to get to them, or to be able to render enough of them routed, collapsed, or eliminated to make Breckinridge's whole division combat ineffective. Well, then the Confederates can at least force a draw simply by disengaging with Breckinridge. That would be incredibly gamey, because historically no commander would do that. Breckinridge's orders were to turn the Union left flank and drive the Union forces away from the eastern edge of the Stones River. His men thoroughly routed all of Beatty's units there. That would be the Union troops here with the blue stripes across the top. Most of those guys fled back across the river, but when Breckinridge pressed the attack towards the river, his men got torn up by the Grand Battery. We'll get to that in a minute. That was on the west side of the river. And then Union troops counterattacked and drove Breckinridge's division back from whence they came. So historically it was a Union victory. Breckinridge's division was basically destroyed. But in the game, that would be very difficult to do. If a Confederate player doesn't want to lose, he can just disengage, and at the very least, it's a draw. I actually scrambled a little bit at the end of the game because I didn't realize the victory condition was if no combat effective Union divisions are east of the river. And as you can see here, it's kind of upside down, but right here we've got Beatty's guys that's a combat ineffective division. Two of his brigades, three of his brigades had been rendered combat ineffective, which means his division was combat ineffective. There were a couple of combat ineffective brigades for Breckinridge, but there was no chance by the end of the fourth turn that more than half of them would be combat ineffective. At the time, only two of them were, and had we gone on to the next turn, those would have been, they would have rallied back to being effective again. So this was basically a draw, since the Union could not render Breckinridge's brigade, or Breckinridge's division, combat ineffective. But they ended up getting, and I did this in the last turn because I realized the Union player would have lost, or the Union side would have lost had I not done this. I ran Negley's men, Negley's division, which are these tan striped units here. I ran them And Negley himself is, I think he's here under Crittenden. Yep. I just ran his guys across the river to make sure that I had at least one Union division that was combat effective east of Stones River in order to avoid the loss to the Confederates. So, as you can see here, this is the, I don't know if you can read it, maybe let me zoom in here. The McFadden farm here, this terrain, you can see this terrain change, slower, elevation change lines there. That's McFadden's Hill. That's where Mendenhall's Grand Battery was situated. You can see some of the cannons still there, weirdly facing the other way. That's because, as you can see here, this collapsed unit right here, this is a Confederate regiment from Withers' division that ended up busting through where the Grand Battery was lined up, right along here. He just plowed right through that Union line and just drove those guys all the way back to the river. They've since advanced back out of there now because this guy is essentially dead. He's surrounded deep in behind enemy lines, but he cracked that Grand Battery line and eliminated several guns, several batteries, and routed a number of Negley's regiments that were holding the hill there. Historically, the Confederates never even got to this side of the river. Again, and I pointed this out in the earlier part of the video, there's an entire division of Confederates on the west side of the river. Historically, they weren't there, or if they were there, they certainly had no designs on attacking. But again, the scenario does not allow for any restrictions on these guys on this side of the river. So I charged them right up. You can see there's a number of them that are collapsed, and one of the brigades was rendered combat ineffective by that. Because they took a lot of fire from that Grand Battery, but not enough fire, and they were able to get up there on the Union line and hit them pretty hard. And again, up there, they cracked that entire Union line, routed a bunch of guys. Down here, same thing, pushed them back considerably, with heavy loss. But if these guys are hitting the Union battery on McFadden's Hill here, it makes it hard for Negley to leave and just leave Hazen's guys behind here, or Palmer's brigade or division behind here to defend all the cannon that are on the hill. If you're running Negley across here to help Beatty, then that gives Withers' guys a really good chance to overrun the Union position here. So it's totally ahistorical to me. I'm not sure where this comes from, that there were these. There was a Confederate division waiting in the Round Forest here to assault McFadden's Hill, because all the maps that I've looked at of Stones River don't even show these guys on the January 2nd fight. It's all Breckinridge. That was one of the reasons why Breckinridge was adamant against doing this assault, because he knew what he was going to run into when he reached the river, which was this massive Union position on McFadden's Hill there. That's why it was called a doomed assault. But if you've got an entire division over here to smack into the Union troops that are already on McFadden Hill over there, well then sure, Breckinridge is going to annihilate the weakened Union troops of Beatty's guys that are here in the woods, push over to the river, and hopefully this other Confederate division on the other side of the river will have pushed into the Union troops on McFadden's Hill, and you've got a really good chance for Confederate success. So just very puzzling to me where that came from. But no restrictions in the scenario for it, so I ran those guys right up there, because they don't affect any victory conditions. The only victory conditions the Confederates have to worry about is what happens to Breckinridge's division. These guys are fully expendable. So might as well use them to help Breckinridge out on the other side. So, it was an interesting scenario in that I enjoyed being able to put that grand battery together for the Union and have so many guns from a lot of different brigades and divisions firing all at once. Anytime you drew Palmer's chit, you could attach all the cannon in the game to Palmer's division. So anytime you pulled his chit, you could fire all the cannon. So that was pretty effective fire and a lot of fun, really, to be able to control that kind of massed firepower. It didn't really help the Union. I mean, they ended up losing a bunch of those guns. I mean, you can see they collapsed a number of regiments here, but not before some really good die rolls from those assaulting Confederate regiments wreaked havoc on McFadden's Hill there. So that was interesting, but in terms of the historicity of it, very questionable. So, nice little ahistorical version of Breckinridge's assault on January 2nd.